It's a privilege to be talking about this report today in this August gathering because I think we're talking about a very important topic. Now, in my brief comments, I will reflect on three aspects. The first one is, why did we commence this project? The second one is, what did we do in the project? And the third one is, what did we learn from the project? So why did we start this project nearly 2.5 years ago? I think it's fair to say that there was a realization that the topic of innovation itself was innovating. I'm sure if you go back to your graduate school days, when innovation was talked about in courses, the image was very much you had scientists with white jackets working in laboratories, mixing chemicals or creating various sophisticated products. Today, if you reflect on the discussion that we've had this morning, and you think about the comments made, and I'll just, I noted a few comments myself, but what kind of themes were mentioned today? Playful, enjoy, social, sustainable, sharing, teamwork, take risks, passion, change my life, be happier, dream, breaking barriers, and I can go on. These kind of labels, these kinds of words today tell us very vividly that innovation is no longer restricted to the research lab of organizations. Innovation is about life. Innovation is about us. And that's the reason why innovation is very important. And it is extremely important to use innovation as a tool to inspire young people. Because if you're unable to inspire young people, you'll never create that hope in society to be able to progress. I just came back from the Rio summit of the World Economic Forum, and there was a very interesting session on poverty. And the comment was raised that, how do you measure poverty? Is it by the actual income that you have? Is it by your consumption that you're able to afford? Or is it by the hope that you have that things will improve? And in fact, there was some kind of a consensus in the panel that probably the biggest measure of poverty is the lack of hope. Lack of hope that things will be better tomorrow, not just for you, but much more importantly for your children. And if we're able to give that hope to people, especially young people, that is very important for progress today. And certainly innovation will play a very important role in giving hope. So that was really, in a sense, the reason, the driver. And we all knew that there was a lot of innovation happening in Latin America, but certainly there was this perception gap. If you looked at most metrics of patents and publications and PhDs and so on, many Latin American countries often appeared at the bottom of the rankings. And that did not necessarily coincide with the rich vitality of the region, the rich creativity of the people, and the rich, diverse nature of innovations happening in the region, as was also talked today by Ferran Adrià about Peru and success in gastronomy. So that was the motivation. So what did we do about it, and how did we actually conduct the project? Now, I distinctly remember about 2.5 years ago, Paco Blanco walked into my office in Fontainebleau in France and said, Telefónica, we are very concerned about Latin America. And we really are very interested in the future of the region. And I shared with Paco some of my research that I had just completed on global innovation. I had just produced a global innovation index, which was very much focused at trying to capture the richness and diversity of innovation in emerging markets. So together we said, well, why don't we try to combine the two and let's try and see, can we apply that model, can we apply some of the thinking to Latin America? Now, the next thing that happened was we went to the OECD. Telefónica and INSEAD had a very strong relationship with the OECD. The OECD had worked a lot on innovation. They had a very rich history of doing a lot of very good work in innovation. And we said, why don't the three of us come together? And Javier, who was then at the OECD, he was a key player in coming together and bringing the three players together. And the three organizations, INSEAD, Telefónica, and OECD, came together and said, can we apply our common resources, a common knowledge pool, to understand innovation better in the region? So, as a series of steps over the last 2 years, we have tried to pool our common knowledge together. We have tried to better understand on a comparative basis how does innovation in Latin America stack up, measure with other parts of the world. We have conducted a number of workshops with experts both in Europe and Latin America. We have solicited the cooperation of other organizations interested in the topic, like, for example, the Inter-American Development Bank. They've been very generous with the time, expertise, and resources. And we have also reached out to independent experts in this area. Now, the end result of this has been that we have created a series of vignettes or mini case studies, which we believe is a first for the region. So today we have 50 mini case studies of innovations in Latin America. They are by no means meant to be a ranking. That's not the objective. They are really meant to be some kind of a celebration, recognition of existing innovations across a range of companies, sizes, different types of innovation, both corporate and social innovation, and they are documented in the report that you will have. We also have conducted a survey of more than 5,000 manufacturing firms trying to understand what kind of corporate processes are happening to support innovation inside firms in Latin America. We have also gone much more in depth in some areas where we believe Latin America has an impressive story and a story to tell. And in this book, this edition, we have chosen mobile telecoms as an area to deep dive. You all probably know that Latin America in general has innovated with mobile telephony quite significantly. The whole prepaid concept, even though it was invented in America, was really popularized and exploited in Latin America. And to Latin America has probably one of the highest penetration levels of any emerging market in the world. So we did a much more of a deep dive in one sector. And we have also come up with recommendations in terms of what to do in the future. A lot of strong foundations to build upon, but what are some recommendations in the future? Now, all of these very important analysis and results are summarized in the report, and I hope you will take some time to read the report, at least some parts of it. We also have created a website that captures the report, makes it available for free. The data is available for your analysis if you wish to do so. And fundamentally, what we believe is, and what we hope, is that this forms the basis for future efforts that will build on this and effectively create some kind of a small microsite around innovation in Latin America. Now, very briefly, I just wanted to share with you what are some of the main lessons or learnings that we have found from our study. Well, first, the good news. The good news is we have reconfirmed, and we knew this, but reconfirmed that there's a lot of innovation happening in Latin America. There's no dearth of innovation in Latin America. We also have found that there are lots of excellent people. The people quality, talent quality is superb in Latin America. So the basic stock for innovation is extremely strong. But we also see that if you look at the global picture, especially if you compare Latin America to the most fast-moving emerging market region, Asia, Latin America has quite a few challenges ahead. And certainly there are a number of important gaps that appear, not just when you look at the region in isolation, but especially in a global picture and compare it to other parts of the world. So in our report, we have identified 4 or 5 important recommendation areas. The first one is really around increasing the R&D intensity in an economy which is largely natural resource based. Now, by most studies, if you look at the R&D intensity, that is lower in Latin America as compared to many other parts of the world. And today, many countries in Latin America have implemented policies for incentivizing R&D investments by the private sector. But in many cases, these policies are not completely understood, as in the case of Brazil, where many executives tell me that they are scared to apply the policy because they don't know whether the tax authority will accept it or not, and they'll have to come back and be fined retroactively for it. Or, as I heard in the case of Chile, where before you actually qualify for the benefit, you have to submit a proposal to the government. And many companies obviously don't feel comfortable submitting proposals before getting the tax credit. Number of small improvements to be made, but there are good examples of other countries that have made dramatic transformations or successfully used the natural resource basis. A good example in mind that is often talked about is Finland. Finland, as you all know, 20 years ago was natural resource dominated economy. Today, it is a very much of a high-tech knowledge economy, so there are very important lessons to be learned from there. Another very good example is Israel. In Israel, 20 years ago, oranges were the main export of Israel. Even today, Israel exports roughly around 22 million worth of oranges every year. Now, this is a very small fraction of the total exports of Israel, but what is very important and what people don't always notice is the technology which Israel has invented or Israeli companies have commercialized about growing oranges in desert-like environments today has created a multi-billion-dollar export industry around oranges. So Latin America can also, by investing in R&D, more in natural resources, create the right kind of perhaps new export markets. The second area where we believe Latin America needs to invest much more is education. It's a topic that has been mentioned several times, and in fact, Rafael talked, very nicely about a great success story that I often refer to also in my own speeches. And despite the success of, Tec de Monterrey or of other institutions in Brazil or in Chile or other countries, there's a lot that we can do to invest in education, invest in people in the region. I think very few countries in the region have a skills strategy. Today, I believe, and our report shows that it's necessary to think about what kind of skills do people need, do economies need to succeed in the 21st century. We need to have some kind of a vision for people. How will they develop? What kind of disciplines will they move into? The topic was mentioned of lawyers in Brazil, and in fact, I was very surprised to hear on my last visit that there are more lawyers in Sao Paulo than in the whole country of France. Now, for lawyers, and it's a great profession, it gives them good money in Brazil, but for the rest of the people, it actually makes life quite complex. And a lot of business people complain a lot about the legal and other bureaucracy that happens in Brazil. Life is not necessarily easy for many people, business people in Brazil. So there's a lot of room for improvements out there, and we have to be able to not just, I'm not saying reduce the number of lawyers, but encourage more people to do more in science and technology. So there is a need to focus investment in education and incentives towards more productive, perhaps more innovation-oriented sectors like science and technology. The role of teachers, very important out here once again. In many countries, teaching is not seen as a valued profession, and we have to be able to somehow create the right kind of incentives to support teachers and to build good universities. The links between universities and industry, very important once again for incentivizing the right kind of links to create good, excellent universities. The third area where we believe action is required is in clusters. Now, the number of studies that show that innovation in sectors that have clusters is multiple times faster than other sectors where companies develop in isolation. So it's very important that today Latin America develops more effective policies for clusters. Certainly in many emerging sectors, it needs to create new policies. In Brazil, for example, today it is not possible, because it doesn't exist to the best of my knowledge, any policy to support clusters in ICT. Now, Brazil as a country needs to have, free export zones, other kinds of incentives to support the technology sector. This does not exist today and certainly needs to be focused on in the future. Now, clusters depend immensely on successful public-private partnership models. So these kinds of partnerships will be very critical in making clusters successful. And certainly we can learn from clusters that have been successful in other parts of the world about how to encourage some of these success stories in Latin America. Last month I was in Costa Rica, and I must say I was a little bit surprised to see that despite the successful investment of Intel, which is a talked about case study, Intel's investment in Costa Rica, they had not really succeeded in creating a high-tech cluster around that big Intel investment. And I think that is a little unfortunate. If you don't have that kind of a policy, a direction, ambition, then the country is unable to get the full benefit from that investment, which is very important in the case of Costa Rica and Intel. It's also interesting that if you have more successful entrepreneurs, you will create more important role models. I asked a question to a group of executives in Costa Rica, who is your business hero? And believe me, they didn't have a good answer. If you don't have a business hero you can identify, if you don't have a Bill Gates, you don't have a Warren Buffett, it's very difficult to identify that kind of stimulus, that motivation. So it's very important to be able to have clusters that create entrepreneurs to succeed on the global stage and become role models. The fourth area we thought is important in terms of policies and recommendations is that Latin America has strengths. We have to recognize that. And Latin America can leapfrog. So it's not just a question of catching up. Today, catch up is not the right mindset. Today, leapfrog is the right mindset. And of course, you can't leapfrog in all areas. You have to choose which areas to leapfrog on or leapfrog in. So I think the areas that potentially are there for leapfrogging are in the domains of green growth. Latin America, for a number of different reasons, have tremendous strengths and assets in green technologies and green economy areas. And if Latin American governments focus on that, that can really provide a stimulus for pushing forward and leapfrogging. See what China is doing in a few areas like solar panels, solar technology, or high-tech trains. They have chosen a few areas and they're investing the entire country's resources and focus on leapfrogging in those areas. So leapfrogging is an important recommendation that we would have for Latin America, and this is very important for going forward. The last point that we recommend in our report is on having a new set of indicators. Measurement is very important. As I say, if you don't measure, you can't necessarily manage. Now, today, the measurement of innovation is grossly incomplete. Today, most of the measurements is around R&D expenditure, patents, publications, PhDs. But we know that you don't need a PhD to innovate. We know that even poor people can innovate. We know that innovations don't always result in new technologies. We know that innovations have a very important social impact. We know that innovation does not only happen in the formal economy, it also happens in the informal economy. How do we measure innovation in the informal economy? How do we measure the social impact of innovation? How do we measure the innovation, for example, in cuisine in Peru? How do those things get captured? Today, we don't really have very good answers, but our project proposes some initial indicators in the direction, and we certainly hope that in the future, other people will pick up on this, and we will work with them and other experts on trying to refine the set of measures. So those were some initial comments, and once again, before I conclude, I wanted to thank Telefónica Foundation for the support. It's been very important for doing this project. I think they've been very far-sighted to support this. I also wanted to thank our partners, OECD, and a number of other people involved in the project. I will not name all of them, but their names are all there, and the introduction to our report, but thank you very much for the privilege of being able to work on this important project.